What is today? Today is December 31st, Tuesday, the eve of 2025. I wrote something down on my paper when I saw something, and I needed to document it. Uh, this documentation is essentially looking at revisiting this thing called a it's it's called a plot. It's called a plot of a setup. So essentially, what I saw, I saw this a few days ago, and what I recollect is that it was it actually had a triangle. Okay, it had a wedge. It had a wedge like that, and the price was bumping up, bumping up, bumping up like that. And then I could tell what it was going to do. It was going to shoot up just like that. Okay, so that's the plot, and I've seen that, which is very similar to, which is very very similar to essentially like a support where it's bouncing off the bottom. So sometimes it'll be a triple bottom, sometimes it'll be a double bottom, but it bounces off a certain known area of support. And so what I've noticed about this in this particular situation was it would go to a resistance, drop down, but that lower part of it keeps increasing, higher, higher. And what ensued was an abrupt rush towards rush. And I thought to myself, I thought to myself, when there is a higher intensity and the duration is longer, which I've seen in the past as well, like if there's a support, let's say something fell and is supported, and the longer it sustains itself in that support area, when it bounces, when it moves with a immense amount of magnitude. And at that point, when I size in on that area, there is a distinction between the trade grade between A and B or C type of a setup. And when I see that, it looks very much like an A plus setup. Okay, so it essentially has a plot. And so essentially, when I look at it, it's now registered into my mind that when I see that particular situation occur at a point where the price is moving towards closer and closer with a smaller amount of dips near that price line, that resistance line, then finally what it's going to do is like a rush out of the gate of that move, just punching right through and shooting really up and moving with a significant amount of momentum up to a certain point with a incredible amount of pips. So I've seen that, and I it in the past. I think what happens is that when I first study about these things, they say in the training material that it is a certain shape. Okay, it's a certain shape. It's a flag setup. It's a wedge setup. It's a certain type of situation, like it's a range, trading range kind of a setup. And when I heard that in the past, uh, there was a lack of deeper understanding of what that meant, essentially. And so what happens is that it seems to create a uh, uh, deeper meaning into and a greater storyline in developing a trade. And so what I've noticed is that when I'm scalping, all I'm doing is I'm waiting for the price to just go to a area and bounce up or something, or that's what I'm essentially expecting. So it'll go to the support area, it'll bounce up, and when I see that candle, I'm saying to myself, it registered in my mind at that level, it's going to move up, and I just go in and move up, and then I immediately take the profit. But what's happening is that there is a longer story behind it. There's a plot. The plot thickens. The plot thickens in interpretation of what the setup is essentially blossoming into. It's blossoming into, and that's why now Al Brooks has a second part, which is called the Encyclopedia of Setups, and it is expensive. He's not explaining it on a video kind of way, but it is documented, and I haven't gotten into it, but it is the plot thickens. The plot thickens as I become more mature in day trading. Okay, as I escape the Earth's orbit, which is essentially, if I look at the Earth's orbit, it has gravity. This gravity is more intense when I'm close to Earth, but when I'm further away from Earth, then the influence of the gravity is less. And I equate that to trading emotional thing that causes subjective behavior. Okay, so that's why there's like essentially there is like there's like what is that black holes out there, which essentially attracts things to bring it in, like stars, and our solar system has a star called sun, right? So it's attractive, but the further it is away from the sun, our solar system star, the impact of its gravity is less. Okay, and so what I've noticed is that now how does that work out? How does that work out to this thickening plot? Plot thickens. Essentially, the plot thickens. Okay, the plot does thicken, and what I've noticed is that there is a higher level of understanding. I have no idea why I put that in there, but what it does is I have no idea. So what it does is that it thickens. It thickens the way that the setups are being developed. Okay, and so and because of the lesser and lesser impact on the subjectivity, which is brought upon the emotional development through this addictive personality that's inherently within me, that causes the subject matter to become less vivid. And so in order to increase the intensity and the vividness of that particular setup, I have to make sure that the addictive personality is placed in a distant area, so that that's gravitational forces are less. Okay, so that's how it's impacting. So when I look now that I'm looking at it on a first level, it's like looking at a building. And a few years ago, about a year or two ago, I described about this area where around it is a moat, and there is a wall, and then on the other side of this wall there are buildings, and in the center of this kingdom is this building. And when I get to the point where I'm looking at just the first floor is being able to successfully on a very, very simple manner understand very, very simple setups. It is understanding the very, very simple setups. And then these setups become more complicated as the storyline and the plot thickens. The plot thickens, and it creates a higher level of the higher level of things that add to it, that creates a bigger story. And that bigger story means a longer duration of that trend. Like in the stock market, there's this thing called a trend day. Okay, so if I don't get on that trend day early on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to miss the bulk of the move. And then when I miss the bulk of the move has already occurred, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, it's going to reverse at any moment. So if I get in, as soon as I get in, what's going to do is it's going to pull back. That's the mindset that I have. And so there is a storyline that's keep building up as the trend moves. The power of the trend is intense enough to override any of the resistance that are within the window of that day's trading. So now that I see it, it's like the simple things about the simple things that I used to see in boxing, in MMAs, in sports, in running. There are it's like, okay, so for instance, if so there's a far more sophisticated manner in which certain activities are done. It really there's a sophistication that's involved in certain activities. And this SMB Capital guy, this Mike Bellafiore, he apparently was a pitcher, and he apparently was good enough to. I think I have to revisit, but I think he was good enough to pitch in college. And so what that meant is that he had developed certain skill sets to generate enough distinction between the ordinary Joe Schmo to somebody who is capable of maintaining his position in a college competitive baseball program. So I can see that now. I can see I don't completely see the setups that are out there, but I see that they exist. I see that exists. And so the more lucrative type of trading setups that are already out there sustains a longer period of momentum. The strength in the movement that it has, while it moves in a certain way in a predictable manner to create a plot. It creates a plot, and the plot thickens. It's 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 like playing it's like it's like it's like playing I guess it's called tic tac toe. I think it's called a tic tac toe. Essentially, three wins. Okay, 1, 2, 3 wins. But there's certain strategies to that too. It's not that simple too on that. But it is essentially based on 9 areas where it's used, and then it becomes checkers, and then checkers become a little bit more complex. The sophistication is higher than tic tac toe. And then there's this thing called chess, which has essentially, I think it's like 64 squares or something like that, right? Yeah, somewhere around there. 4, 4, 4, 4. So 8 times 8, that's about 64 squares. So within these 64 squares, there is the opening combination and the way that it develops into and evolves into a a uh, a game where it ends essentially has an incredible amount of possibilities, and it becomes incredibly sophisticated based on the way that the certain pieces move in a certain way, because it creates and essentially limits as it moves and develops into as the pieces move. And each piece has a specific strategic way that it moves, and certain ones like the queen moves in all sorts of manners, and certain pieces like the pawns are restricted to move in a certain way, and then after it gets to on the other side, it develops into a queen. Okay, if it gets there. So day trading is essentially very, very similar to becoming a very, very sophisticated individual. Speaking for myself, initially my thinking was I just buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, without knowing what good setups are, what the bad setups are. And then after a few years, I realized that there are some certain emotional deficiencies that hinders further development, and it blinds and limits my trading capability. And then at a point where I realized that, then the subjectivity has been extinguished by the objectivity. That objectivity brings forth of understanding where I am on a two-dimensional scale to leap into the third dimension where the y-axis is, to understand that there are higher levels of understanding in trading. And what I've noticed is that these things have a certain story to tell. Okay, apparently on a trending day, it apparently it's the day starts out with a significant amount of, if it's trending up or trending down, in this case trending up, on a looking at things from a total perspective of the the uh, the stocks that are moving up, okay, versus the stocks that are moving down, which essentially makes up the indices to define whether it's going to be a trending day or not trending day, has a significant impact on the ratio of gainers versus the losers. And so if there's a significant difference in the number of gainers versus the losers, then there's an association. There is an association that the day could end up possibly being a trending day, and happens on another statistical data point is that it happens maybe 20% of the time, right? So now I see that there are sophistications. Like a little baby starts to crawl, then it starts to wobble around as it attempts to walk on two. And then when it gains a balance in the way that the baby walks, then it starts to walk at a quicker pace. And then at a quicker pace, then there are certain physical activities that requires a further enhancements in muscle structures, developments to create a balance, as certain other activities are tied into, like jumping or moving around in a certain way, and then afterwards running. Okay, and so these are the developments, and essentially what I've noticed is that there is the plot thickens. The market essentially has a depth of understanding that is very, very deep, and that's why it still makes sense. It makes sense. It's understanding that the market needs to be treated like a well-respected elder. A well-respected elder has acquired the deep understanding and sophistication and intricacies of a complicated movements in the price to create a particular setup based on the way that it moves. And that wave, the way that it moves essentially is a plot of the market that is thick. It can be very thick. If it's a parabolic move, it's just going to move to a certain point. However, there could be a situation where it moves with the complications of other influences that makes that particular setup into a very, very thick plot.